started. If you guys, if you guys are all ready, you're all pretty much there.
I think so. Yeah, all good. So James, as well, you've been to lab events and things like that. So you're known very well in the homebrew scene. Is there still a Brighton homebrew group? Still sort of involved in that, or?
It's it's a bit low key these days, and it's haven't sort of we've had meetings over the last 6 months or so, but it's struggled a bit since COVID getting back up and around. So also being a fairly small town, you guys have a slightly larger pool of people to to take from. So we also have a brew club in Lewes, which is doing reasonably well as well down in the southeast. So yeah.
Good beer village, Lewes. Very good beer village.
Yes.
Yes. There.
Yeah, Abyss, Beak, Arby's, some good breweries in the area. Yeah.
Maybe that should be a club meeting out one day down to Lewes. So yes, James has been around the homebrew scene for as long as I can remember, or as long as I've been involved anyway. We had a nice trip to Bamberg last year, and he has been working on his own brewing software recently, but volunteered to give sort of an overview of brewing software options in general. And I don't know whether it's a presentation or more of a sort of discussion. But either way, I'll hand it over to you, James.
Yeah, a bit of both really. Basically, I've been writing brewing software. Well, I wrote some brewing software as a little project to learn how to code. I finished that sort of May this year, so I haven't really been focused on pushing it to the wide world, and I don't really intend to. I've sort of been brewing for about eight years now, and I've been brewing using mostly Beersmith throughout my sort of brewing career. And I sort of thought that Beersmith was suboptimal in terms of brewing software. Not really enjoyed using it, found the interface a little bit clunky and there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of terminology. It's just very, very data heavy. So I decided to write my own software. So that was January 2021 through to about April. So big learning process. And hopefully just sharing with you guys a little bit about what I learned making it, and obviously I had to go to market and survey the whole situation, the setup, and sort of learn a little bit about how brewing software works and all the fun calculations that go with it. So I thought maybe just to start off with, if it's not like a crazy idea, to just perhaps go around folks who are attending and see what they're using, and whether or if they're using software or not, why they use it, and whether they're happy with it or not. Is that a sensible idea, James?
Sure, yeah, I'll happily go first. So, I've used Beersmith since 2010, whenever it was I started brewing, and that's pretty much it. I dabbled with some online software that was, I think, called Brew Toad at the time, and then I think that's become Brewer's Friend, but I've never sort of quite happy with it all. So just sort of stuck with Beersmith, the paid version. I know it's sort of a bit of a clunky, and just has buttons everywhere. But once you get to learn how to use it, it works pretty well, and I've just sort of built it into my workflow. Outside of that, I do have the odd a couple of sort of, I have a water spreadsheet and that I made myself, as well as Brew and Water. So I'd use a range of things for it, but yes, primarily Beersmith on Windows and occasionally on the mobile phone as well.
On Beersmith as well. I transferred over from a bit of software called ProMash that's no longer being developed. I started using that well over 10 years ago. Probably been using Beersmith for about the last 5 or 6 years. So I had a look at the original Graham Wheeler stuff, but I just felt it looked sort of too Excel-ish, if you like, and it didn't feel like it had a sort of professional interface to it. So again, I'm on a paid subscription based on Beersmith. So again, like James, occasionally I sort of use the bits on your mobile. But yeah, fine. Like you guys have said so far, it seems a bit sort of clunky. There's a lot going on the screens, and sometimes that can be a bit intimidating if you're just getting into a software to use in your brewing. And we're all still learning how to brew, and we're all learning stuff every day or every time we brew. So sometimes you can imagine a new person coming along, a new brewer, wanting to get into software as well. Yeah, this is very overwhelming, I think so. But I'm sticking with Brewsmith for the time being.
I'm another long time ProMash. I used it till about 2015, 2016. And then I found Beersmith. I looked at it, but American units, horrible interface. So I went to Brewfather, and wow, that's a modern interface. That's a very integrated product. I can monitor the graphs of my fermentation with iSpindle. Yeah, Brewfather is what I've used for all my book recipes now, and I found it very useful. And Thomas, the developer, is very approachable. And yeah.
Over here in the States, I use Beersmith, although one of our club members does use the Brew Toad, or whatever that is turned into now. Yeah, it's designed by an engineer, so the interface is super clunky, and there's a lot of data in there. But after a while, like others, I've learned to work with it. Wouldn't mind something a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier, more intuitive design wise. You can put in metric units into Beersmith. You just have to type it out in the thing. So if you're putting in instead of say 10 pounds of malt, you can type in 8.5 K, and that should pop up. And it'll convert it back over to the American units or the imperial units, but you can put them in at least.
You can also just go to the settings and change it to metric.
I suppose you could do that. I haven't had the need, but
yeah, there's definitely metric settings in there.
I used Beersmith for many years and moved over to Brewfather, and I found it much easier to use. I find the interface is just much more streamlined, easier to copy stuff. And I also use James's water spreadsheet, which I think is fantastic. It's one of the easiest pieces of water software to use. So thanks, James.
I might be a bit of an outlier. I do it all by hand. I like it. I enjoy it. I have lots of tables, lots of references. And I just like to work it all out by hand.
I've recently picked up the Grainfather S40, so I've been using the Grainfather app and actually finding that quite useful. Works quite well. It's got a water piece in it as well that you can compare your water to the profile of the particular style you want to use. So yeah, I find that quite useful. It seems fairly streamlined in my limited experience of software.
I'm also one that uses Brewfather as well. As I said, I just love the really clean, modern web UI, and I'm a sucker for data and charts as well. So yeah, it's really cool. Used to use Beersmith a little while ago, but he released a Mac version. Well, I mean, I use a Mac, and he released an update for it, and he just completely balked it. So I just thought, right, that's it. I'm going to go somewhere else. And I've been with a Brewfather about a year now.
I was the same journey as a few other people. Did Beersmith for a few years, and I think I found it quite frustrating that the layout was just had quite a steep learning curve. But once Brewfather kind of reared its head, I swapped over, and yeah, I never went back. It's nice across all the devices, updates. He updates a lot. He's really responsive as well. I had a couple of glitches with it, but I'm not sure if that's my settings or their settings, putting the same recipes into Beersmith and Brewfather and something else, getting kind of quite different results for things like pH and a few other things. So I'm not quite sure what calculations those guys are using, whether they're different or whether it's just my calculations, but to be investigated still.
Different calculations, probably different equipment profiles as well. A lot of it really depends on the volumes you're using and how much liquid gets absorbed and wasted, all that kind of stuff. So that's maybe the cause.
Yeah. I actually just redid my whole setup because it was becoming a right pain in the ass. So the most recent one I did, I completely cleaned off all the equipment profiles, everything, the whole water profile, put it all in again, and actually hit all the numbers bang on. So I suspect it's user error, as they say.
Yeah, I'm another Brewfather user. I started with Brewer's Friend when I first started, all grain. I just found I couldn't get on with it, and then I found Brewfather, and it's just so simpler, just the layout of it. Then I export it and import the recipe into the Grainfather app because I've got a G40. I've not tried doing recipes on the Grainfather app yet. I just find that one very, compared to Brewfather, it's pretty unintuitive, I find. Even trying to start the brew day off, I can never find which button to press. And if you're doing it on the web, you can't, but you have to do it on the app, on the phone. It's a bit confusing, whereas Brewfather, whatever you're on, it just works. So yeah,
I have the same experience, Joe, as I've got a pretty similar setup to you in that sense, but also just the exact same recipe in Grainfather versus Brewfather. It's even got like different waters for mash and sparge, like equivalent ratios and things are all quite different. So I kind of find myself wondering, what do I trust a lot of the time with software?
yeah, mine's not too bad. I've managed to align the equipment profiles a bit better now, and it's usually within a litre or 1.5 litres with the mash and the sparge. Usually the same total water, it just splits it slightly differently, I find.
Is that, sorry, as I'm just having dinner. Is that everyone? Have we gone through the whole lot? Has everyone said maybe Jennifer or Mark?
Yeah, well, I use a Grainfather, so I've used their app, but I use Brew and Water extensively. I quite like Brew and Water. It's been quite reliable and accurate for me. But I use a Brew Pilot for monitoring, so I use other bits of software, but not particularly one for the recipes and so on.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add that I've been through the journey of Beersmith for a couple of years when I started brewing. I did not find it complex, but I guess that says more about me than about the software, because I'm used to those kinds of interfaces. So kind of feeling a bit at home. But the reason I switched to Brewfather is, as people have mentioned, it's cross-device. I can be sometimes looking at it from the phone in my pocket and a laptop in another room if I'm there, etc. It all syncs. With equipment profiles, I think you really need to be conscious of the fact that the malt profiles change all the time. So that often affects, like I check the malt sheets every time I brew, just in case the spec of the malt has changed, and that does often affect the numbers. In terms of your absorption rates, your hops obviously impact type of hops, whether you're using rice hulls or not. There are a lot of variables that could affect your profile, but I found personally with Brewfather, once I've dialed in and taken control of those variables, or at least know where and to anticipate them, I'm within half a litre or less every single time. But it does take a lot of time, kind of, effort to keep it up that way. I always consider all of these things. So I would say, unless you're Sir Glide or have the time, it's probably not worth it. I'm sure you can be okay with missing a liter of beer here and there.
Okay.
I just winged it for about 5 years, but then I bought a G30 about a year ago, so I'm using the Grainfather app now, which I find okay.
I've never used the Grainfather app. Is it? Is anybody here who's tried it can compare it to Beersmith or Brewfather?
It's like Brewfather probably was like in its first gen version. I don't know. It's not that. It feels cheaper and far more underdeveloped because they're obviously developing the product and the software to be in unison. Whereas with Brewfather, that's not necessarily so much the case. That's I guess is my take on it. And I would not use the Grainfather app, but because I have a Grainfather, I have to use the app to put the recipe in to make the control unit do the steps that you want it to do.
Okay, that's kind of annoying to make you use it, but there we go.
But that's just my preference. But it works for other people, right? So it's just what other people want.
I'm pretty sure that Brewfather has an integration. You can push your recipe out.
Well, if that's something I've learned today, then that's going to make me very happy by the time I go.
I am kind of pretty confident in this one. Because if you look at the list of integrations, it's really extensive. And that's actually another really cool thing that, if you like your gadgets, that's probably the one software that does the most.
Didn't Joe just say that?
It's the G30 it integrates with. The new Wi-Fi ones, it doesn't. It's a different API, I think. So the G30 does it over Bluetooth, doesn't it? But you certainly can export recipes in a
I've done that before.
Format,
yeah, you can export and copy it over, but I just found it wasn't copying the data very accurately. Like it leaves some values blank, so I was having to basically reload the whole thing anyway. Anyway, don't want to talk about my circumstances too much, but anyway, I think it's a bit amateur in comparison to Brewfather.
Yeah. Okay. And so going back to Mark Hopkins, and what's your experience with the Brewfather, the Grainfather stuff app, coming from using paper or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I like sort of playing around with it. I think, like Stuart, I quite like the water feature that it's got. It's in beta format, but that's quite interesting. You can use various sliders and drop various values in and see how that affects the sort of desired profile that you want. So I quite like that. It's nice colors and things like that. It's nicely, to me, it's well, not having used anything before, it's a nice graphic, but I guess maybe there are other things out there that are better. But yeah, my limited experience with it, yeah, I'm quite happy with it.
Okay. Well, I guess that leads us on to So I'm going to talk a little bit just about what I think are the kind of drawbacks of the current software. Certainly, Beersmith, and I'm sort of in agreement with most of you, having done a little bit of a survey of the existing brewing software. I think Brewfather's by far and away the market leader. It's by far and away the easiest, most well developed software out there. I still think it might be a little bit data heavy. Again, good for engineers maybe, but for beginner brewers, perhaps there's a lot going on. There's a lot to learn. My big problem with Beersmith is water integration. I found I struggled a bit, or I got a bit annoyed with having to write like a target water profile in a Beersmith recipe. And I was just wondering, how good is the Brewfather water support? Because think it's pretty decent, isn't it? Anyone speak on that?
I find it really good. Yeah, it's simple, and because it's got the little plus and minus buttons, you can basically just add, whichever salt you want until you hit the levels you want. Kind of updates each time you click on it. So it's it's almost brainless. It does it automatically, but you don't really need to use that. It's so simple.
Okay.
And it's
Yeah, it's
usually
pretty good.
pretty accurate, I've found, with the pH, apart from when my pH meter was at the spout.
Yeah, I would say that it does work really well, but you know, I still use Brewing Water on the side, and then I just plug in the numbers into Brewfather. And I mean, if you're just looking at salts, it actually works really, really well. And just controlling and adding, it's wonderful. You can select the target profiles, you can set your dilution levels, blah blah blah. It's all great. But I find that Brewing Water is the one that gives me the right pH, and Brewfather just doesn't. You know, it's 0.3 of a difference, but that 0.3, if it's too high or too low, you're out of your range.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I benchmarked Brewing Water against the Brewfather water calcs, and my experience is similar to Serge. It's very, very close. I think it's just the algorithm that's been used for the calculation is different. So I've cheated. I've put all the profiles in from Brewing Water, and for a practical brewer, it's near enough. As in, as in, there's a bit of tolerance, but there's a lot of other factors as well. So as far as I'm concerned, it's I don't use the auto calc in Brewfather. I tend to use Brewing Water as my preference. Yeah, I think it's more accurate, and Martin Brungard's a really nice guy as well. I've met him once. It's good.
Does anybody use anything else for their water?
I've actually found the most accurate water profile I used was the one I got from Murphy and Sons, doing a water profile there. So whatever their additions were, I kind of put it to one side at one point after I kind of discovered you could get all the chemicals separately. So I thought, great, I'll do my own. And as usual, I screwed it up quite a lot. And in the last, I don't know, 6 months or a year, whenever I've kind of gone backwards and forwards to try and kind of compare batches, whenever I've used the Murphy and Son very standard measurements for just the 3 basic styles of lagers or IPAs or stouts, it's bang on. It tastes better and it hits the numbers better, and the brew comes out a little bit more reliable. I've got to say, I mean, apart from I've tried it with Brewfather doing the automatic one, and it never seems to quite work for me. But again, that might be user.
Dave, did you get your water analysed by Murphy's or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just had mine done a couple of months ago as well. So
yeah, maybe every year or two.
Just a tip: you can years ago when I got my water report done for Murphy's, I just asked for them for the non-proprietary additions, and they were happy to give it. So maybe that's something to do if you get it done again.
Okay. Actually, I quite like the CRS, even though you end up using so much more of it than lactic, but it doesn't have the twang to it.
Okay. Anybody use anything else? The other spreadsheet I remember is Easy Water. I think that's one I got. I think I started on where I was trying to get my head around it all. Anyone? Does anyone use Beersmith to manage their water, their pH and additions, all that kind of stuff?
I've looked at it, but it doesn't, or at least when I last looked at it, it wasn't very good at. I don't think it allowed you to basically handle anything other than pretty much RO water. Or it had limited ability to handle adding acids other than something very specific like lactic, I think.
I've used Beersmith for the water additions, mostly because that's what I'm using anyway. It was a bit of a steep learning curve to get to use it. I believe the acids, they have phosphoric and lactic as well, but then you can use acidulated malt, which is supposed to then also adjust pH. But as far as matching water profiles, I found it does a fair job. We've got water reports from somebody in our club for our local water. And then I use the basic stuff that's given in Beersmith, but I have looked at other water reports for places like Berlin and Manchester and various different places. Done my best to try to translate that into a new profile for them. It's okay.
Okay, good stuff. I'm just wondering whether to show you a little thing that I did for for this software. Let's have a look. See if I can do that. How do I share the screen now? Oh, okay. There we go. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Sorry, 1 second, guys. I need to work out how to use this.
Whilst you're doing that, I was just going to say, on the water calculation side of this, particularly pH calculation, there's no set formula for it, although, well, there is a set formula for it based upon chemistry, but it doesn't really work in brewing, because there's other things going on in the mash. So tends to be the ones that are particularly like brew and water. Martin's done a lot of basically trial and error of various mashes and then checking the pH and that sort of thing to figure out what the sort of what the ideal formula should be, what the pH curve is when you add in various different things, because you tend to find otherwise the pH calculations that should work don't. Particularly at the more extreme ends of things like London water, which has got a lot of calcium and alkalinity in it, or highly sort of roasted grains, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's why sort of pH can be a bit all over the place between different bits of software, but certainly brew and water does seem to now be very accurate.
Okay. I think I will set up here. Can anyone see that screen share? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, a little sort of play around here. It was just a little project I did. Brewer's Friends has a crazy page where they've got user water reports, right? User submitted water reports. There's no geodata with them. There's just notes. So I used a script, ran a Python script, and I grabbed all of that data, including the ions and everything, and automatically matched as many of them as I could with geodata, and I've pulled it into a database, and you can now do a search and grab a bunch of water reports, which I thought was quite handy. So for example, here I've got 12 or so from Brighton, but you can do a search for London or wherever you want to search for, and like a search radius as well, which I figure at the very least it would be nice to have some sort of place to share water reports, because everybody's getting them all the time, and it would be the easiest thing to do to be able to share these water reports and pull in some sort of average over time, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was one little cool thing that I've done. Anyway, perhaps we talk about another subject now. So one of the things I've sort of realized in building this software is the importance of equipment profiles, and we kind of touched on this a little bit when we were sort of doing the rounds. Perhaps Serge talked about it. I use Brewing Software as a sort of record keeping, but I think the more you do it, the more you kind of understand that it's very good for predicting the wort composition, wort volumes, pH, color, all that kind of stuff, and having sort of built the brewing tool from the ground up, pretty much, I've sort of come to realise how important the volumes are, and how confusing all of the terminology is. I think doesn't seem to be like a real set way of determining or sort of calling various volumes that you had. So I'm just wondering, perhaps we'll do a little round and sort of see how much attention the brewers here have put to accurately adding their equipment profiles, or whether they so that's the ton dead space and boiler dead space and boil off, all this kind of stuff, boiler rates, and yeah, how accurately or how much effort people have put into building and sort of inputting all that kind of data. Would be interested to find out. So yeah, perhaps someone can go.
Well, for me, like the main thing I use Beersmith for is for sort of the recipe building. I don't actually use it for recording stuff after the brew day. I move everything I've done into a sort of separate document that I can then enter anything else in and all the notes and things like that into it, because I don't find it very easy to use for sort of post brew day. So for me, I've gone through and actually sort of tried to fine tune stuff quite a bit, so I get pretty accurate numbers in terms of when I put something in, I know roughly what I should be getting at the end of the day. And one of the things I've learned with it is the efficiency number. I do need to tweak it on a per recipe basis. I know that for higher gravity beers, that efficiency is going to drop a bit. So I'll bring it down a sort of % or two here and there. But otherwise, yeah, I've got it fairly well dialed in for volumes, and it's now sort of pretty accurate for me. Normally I'm within 2 or 3 points at max, unless I have a really, really bad or really good brew day.
So the Beersmith, I think they've got two different terms, and they've got mash efficiency, which I think is the most important one, and then there's brew house efficiency, which takes into account losses.
But you can only set brew house efficiency in a recipe.
So yeah, I find that a bit strange.
I mean, so the mash efficiency is essentially the efficiency into your kettle, and
conversion.
So essentially how much sugar you get into the kettle out of what was in your mash tun, and the brew house efficiency is then how much of that ends up in the fermenter. So when you lose a bunch to trub in the kettle, that drops it down by quite a bit.
Yeah, which I mean, you'd think also more grains means you're going to get more loss, more absorption, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, okay, great. Cheers, James. Thanks for sharing.
I had my equipment profiles pretty spot on when I was using ProMash. Again, it would be spot on, maybe 1 or 2 points short or within a litre on volumes, either way. But I'm really struggling on getting my Beersmith profiles to be anywhere close. It's just, I don't know, I've tried all kinds of things. And I'm just, it's almost like finger in the wind type thing. And yeah, that's one thing I really don't like about it. And it's, I'm finding it hard to dial it in. And it's, I've put in loads of different settings on there. And, sometimes if you've got a particular recipe you've got from somebody and you pull it in, it might be for 19 or 23 litres, and I want to upscale it to 40 or 50 litres. You think, okay, I've got all my quantities now. Look at your figures at the end of the brew, and I'm way out. So that's the only bit I'm not happy with on it, really.
Are you way under or way over?
Normally I'm under on gravity. By anywhere up to, I mean, last weekend's brew was a bit different because I far too much liquor in the mash tun and on the sparge anyway. But generally, it's I'm anywhere between up to 6 points short. So
I don't use the software to control my brew day. I have a custom made brewing system, and I essentially have a stainless steel brew in the bag, no sparge arrangement, and I've managed to set that up within Brewfather, and it's really not an issue to me. And I will I haven't found too much variation in using different grains on the absorption rate, and for the types of beers that I brew, and I think that's a big dependent. If you're brewing big beers, you might have different experience, but the sort of 1040-ish beers that I tend to brew for drinking, I can hit my points every time. But I'm not using I'm using a PID controller to control my mash and my boil. So I guess it's something that you have to put in the context of how configurable is the software to meet your needs. And I find Brewfather's fine.
Yeah, I've been getting closer and closer on my equipment profile on Brewfather. So every time, obviously, I do brew. I'll see obviously whereabouts I was off and try and fine tune it. And yeah, I mean, I do have the odd recipe where I go way off. Like the very last one, I seem to. Well, if it's accurate, I had about a mash efficiency of 85%, which I can't quite believe. So, but then other ones I'll be very, very close. So yeah, it's tricky, but I'm getting closer, I think.
I'm still fresh into just starting to use my Grandfather, so I'm only 3 or 4 brews in. I've accepted the figures that they've given as their profile for the Grandfather S40, because in theory they should have a good idea of the losses and everything else on it. I'm still kind of getting a feel for it at the moment, so I'm right at the front end of the curve on that. Probably not got enough experience yet to know where it's at and whether it's actually accurate or not. So, but I do find that some of the profiles they put in for all of the various different grains and things doesn't always fit with what you end up getting. So you have to make use of the facility to put in your own version of the grain as opposed to the list they've got.
Okay, anybody else want to chime in about equipment stuff?
I think I did start with the default equipment setup. So there's a Braumeister 20-litre setup in there with the batch size of 21 litres. And I looked at the profile. There were different losses for kettle and shrub and all of that, and that added up to more than the difference. So if the default setting, for example, is add 21 litres, and you'll get a 21-litre batch out of it. But I was having so much more losses than that, even though I was tipping the kettle up to get the last bits out. So I ended up tweaking it like here, there, and everywhere. And of course, eventually it's completely out of whack. As I say, I kind of reverted back to a completely clean slate one for the last couple of brews, and it hit the numbers bang on. So I think it's probably accurate, but it's only as accurate as me putting or anyone else putting the numbers in, really, and then getting them correct on the brew day as well. So yeah, I think I might go back to page 1 with that kind of stuff, because I found that changing the batch size to 23 litres or something actually seemed to make quite a difference. And I was like you, Mick, coming up like 5, 6, 7, 8 points short sometimes, thinking, well, how can that be? That can't be a mash efficiency problem, because it's the same system over and over. the grain is not going to be that different. It's not that old. It's not that new. The temperatures are all the same. I'm assuming it's just if you put in the numbers just slightly wrong, you do miss the numbers you're trying to hit quite easily, I think, in my experience anyway.
I might just do another screen share because I've again I sort of want to keep it away from doing the promo stuff, but I found I really struggled with volumes and just understanding where the losses were, what the terminology was, all that kind of stuff, and I think really locking that down, because you really do have to just go through the Beersmith manual, understand what the terms are and how to sort of tweak them. And I'm just gonna do a little screen share. That's 1 second. So there we go. So basically, I ended up building like a chart here, going from sort of left to right, sort of starting with the sort of the full additions here, the sort of the mash water, the sparge water. That's that full volume there. Oh, sorry, that's actually here is sort of wastage. You've got the grain volume, and it sort of drops down, and then you've got so that's actually increasing the volume of the mash tun. And then as you sort of remove the water from the mash tun, you end up with a loss from the grain absorption. I found that's actually quite high, and I'm not sure if Beersmith report on that particularly well. So then you've got the sparge water addition here, so it goes back up. And then as you do the boil, you've got evaporation, you've got hop absorption, and that is also actually quite a lot. And I'm not sure if Beersmith underreport on that too. I'm sure you can probably configure it. You've got shrinkage here, so there are sort of all these losses you've got and additions and losses on the way, and that's at the actual fermenter, I think. So then you've got going out of the fermenter into out the kettle into the fermenter, you've got your dead space there as well, and then a bit of FE dead space. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with the volumes, and it was a bit of a challenge just to try and get my head around it all. And I think all of the different brewing software seems to sort of term them quite differently, and actually trying to get your head around all of that to get your final accurate volumes is quite challenging. So yeah, I do have sympathy with anyone who's got any issues with that. Anybody else got any sort of equipment additions to add?
I think my main issue was I'd be measuring the gravity, pre-boil, post-boil, etc., and during the boil, and just not stirring it enough. So I was getting an inaccurate gravity reading, and then that caused me to panic and chucking a load of DME or something. Then I'm massively over, so then I liquor back. So I think a lot of it is just don't sweat it, just let it go through and measure it at the end.
Yeah, you can definitely overdo it on the software front, can't you? And try and do too much with the software, whereas actually you can liquor back and just tweak the gravity at the end of the boil. So yeah, I found that's why I haven't really in the past paid too much attention to the volume stuff. Another thing I ended up doing for this was yeast starters, yeast management. What's people's experience with using starters, calculating yeast pitching rates, all that kind of stuff? Does anybody bother, or who bothers, and what do they use? Do they use spreadsheets? Do they use the Brewfather software or whatever?
Brewfather every time works a treat.
Yeah, it's good as it.
I've tried many over the years because I've been using my own starters for pretty much as long as I've been brewing. So I've tried the Beersmith. It did the job. Especially with the multiple steps. I tried multiple online ones with different stirring methods, etc. Whether you use a stir plate, whether you shake, etc. Brewfather one just simply works. and it integrates with everything else that you've got. So I just keep using that.
Anybody else? Yeast starters?
I've been using, I think it's the Brewer's Friend one actually.
It's good.
Works, yeah, because it allows you to do multi-step and things like that. Although to be fair, more and more recently, I've just kind of been, I have a rough idea as to what I'm going to need, and it's kind of like, well, I'll do a 1 litre starter for smaller beers, and then I might do a 2 litre starter or a couple of steps for a bigger one, and it's kind of a bit more meh, winging it these days.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing about brewing. If you're working in a brewery, you're brewing pretty much the same beer every time, and there's less need to to tweak these things, isn't there? Yeah. So, what do other folks you do with yeast? Anything novel?
No,
Not much.
I do the same Brewfather calculator and a mix of that and what James was just saying, really. So I think anything up to 1050, probably a 1 litre starter from a wet yeast, and then anything lagery or bigger 2 litre starter, but have a rough idea what it is. Dried, you just sprinkle it in these days.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I guess I'll sort of talk through a little bit about the pre sort of fermentation stuff. Do folks here? I know Brewfather's really good for logging with ice spindle, that kind of stuff. How much attention do folks pay to record keeping with gravity, temperature, all that kind of stuff? Be interested to know, actually. So I'm a bit fastidious about it. I like to know what's going on with my fermentations, and like to keep track of gravity every 3 days or so. Fastidiously adding it, because I don't have an ice spindle or anything like that. But what the folks record there, if they do bother, if they don't, maybe so as well. Be interested to know.
I'll use a tilt, and I'm looking at those charts pretty much every 5 minutes.
It's quite exciting, isn't it?
I just love those charts. Those charts are the best thing, I think.
Eddie the Eagle Edwards little ski jump.
I've got an ice spindle, and I've also used a brew pilot to control my fermentation fridge, and I'm in the process of developing an ESP32 based Dewberry to reflect my ice spindle numbers and my brew pilot numbers on a little thing. I'll just see that I can.
Very cool.
Other way. There we are. So, and that will flip over to the ice spindle screen in due time. And so I like the data, I must admit, and I get I've gone through a huge learning experience to be able to pull data, other way, there we go. Pull data off the Brewfather API, which, if you'd asked me 12 months ago what an API was, I wouldn't have had a clue. But I worked my way through it, and it's pulling down data from Brewfather, and I'm able to do my own calculations, because I don't. While we're on limitations of things, Brewfather calculates ABV the way it calculates ABV. I particularly like calculating ABV that compensates for the change in gravity as the alcohol increases. So I use the UK customs and excise adjustments, which I programmed into the ESP32. So I'm getting my Clayton, but not use local terms. I'm getting my adjusted ABV adjusted for temperature change, which Brewfather doesn't do, and also for what I consider a more accurate algorithm. So yeah, data's important. Having an API, I think, is useful. Yeah, and graphs.
I don't think Beersmith's got. Don't think Beersmith's got an API.
Possibly not, but as I say, I part of my learning experience. Postman is an interesting tool, and Postman allows you to access the API. You send it commands, and I was really struggling, so I emailed Thomas, the developer of Brewfather, and he said, well, you need to do this. And I thought, right, gotcha. Yeah, so everybody's different, but I happen to like having the data for whatever purpose. I can see progress or not.
I think it's really helpful to understand if your fermentation stalled. So, you know, you can tweak the temperature a little bit. Bill's just sent a funny message saying, I ferment with buckets, and oh, sorry, he's got a longer message there. Leave the hydrometer in the brew and check every few days. Sorry, I've lost my voice. Okay, sorry, Phil, I shouldn't laugh. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Cheers, Phil.
That's analog, of course. That's excellent.
Okay, and kudos to you, Peter. That sounds like a really interesting project. Not something that everyone will be able to go through, but no, good for you for getting that.
I have a thing on GitHub, which again is something that I didn't know much about a while ago.
Yeah,
and
would you send a link?
I can do.
Chuck it on the chat if you can. Be interested to know.
Yeah, I'll put that in the messaging thingy. I'm on my second version, which is an ESP32. The first one was an 8266. So everybody's eyes are glazing over, so I'll shut up.
It's all right.
Thanks very much.
I know what you're talking about. I use Brewpilot. I've got 2 or 3 other things, and I built some ice spindles. So I do like to have the records, and well, being able to see in real time what's going on. You can see what happens with different yeast profiles, with different yeast types. You can see what effect having a different cell count at the beginning, say lag time, all of that's there. So it's I find it fascinating, and you can certainly see the difference between because I'm doing quite similar beers, using different yeasts on exactly the same grain bill or whatever. You know, lag time, the sharpness, or the time for clearing up, and so on. But you don't need it, if you sort of.
It's really nice to have the data.
Yeah, I'm hoping
sorry.
to calibrate my ice spindle shortly. But other than that, I do take quite a lot of notes, analog style, during the mash as well. So I do kind of volume, pH, temperature, gravity, and then kind of visual sensory notes at every stage. I've made myself a little
nice
brew sheet.
It's blurring out.
It is a bit closer in. Oh man, is that
yeah.
somewhere in between?
Filter.
We have a spreadsheet for all the brews, sort of going back to from 1 to 270. And
270.
So you can, I mean, we actually brew a handful of types, like usually NEPAs or IPAs or a hoppy wheat beer. So you can compare the one you've just done with the last time you did that and see if there's any difference, and try and sort of get the volume the same and so on, which they usually are about the same.
It's really useful to go back and look at some of the notes during the mash as well, because sometimes when I've missed the numbers, I've forgotten if I've added 2 or 3 mils of lactic acid, or like 400 or 300 grams of DME. So I've got the SGs at various stages every 10 minutes sometimes.
Yeah, and
before.
also if occasionally one goes wrong, you can sort of
Yes.
look, well, when did I dry hop? Oh, maybe that was a bit early, and so on. So
Yeah, it's really useful,
really
isn't it,
useful
to
to
go
have
back,
them.
which is my own API. But yeah, I'm interested in what Pete's set up and what you guys have set up, Jim, as well.
It's not. It's and one of the nice things about Brew Pilot is that you can calibrate the eye spindle whilst it's in the brew. So if you make a highish gravity beer, so that you've got the high end of the range and so on, and you just put in at the beginning what it is, and then take a few samples, and then use the hydrometer readings from that, and because you put those in real time, it knows what the tilt is on the device, and therefore will calibrate it as you're doing a brew. So it takes into account things like yeast stuck on the top of the eye spindle, which can affect things and so on. It's a nice little feature to just let it do itself.
Nice.
Anybody use anything different? I think I've got a Plato, which is measures the bubbles going through a little like a little tube. Unfortunately, if you chill it, it sucks the liquid back into the airlock, which is really annoying, and into the beer. So I've had that. Yeah, that happened to me a couple of times. They do have like a one-way valve, which they sent me because I got the original Kickstarter, but that's somewhere because I had no idea what it was for until I found out the hard way. So yeah, and anybody use anything else? Does anyone take manual gravity readings and just add it into their their spreadsheets or their software?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a sample and just sort of stick and put the hydrometer into it, and then if it's not quite done, then that sample sits on the sort of on my counter or something like that in the kitchen, so I can just keep an eye on roughly where where it's going, and to also generally just see when the fermentation is going to end in terms of gravity. So yeah.
So you just leave it open on the kitchen counter? Really?
Well, not my whole ferment, no, just a little sample in a hydrometer jar.
Just the hydrometer sample.
Yeah. It's like, so I've got a lager going at the moment, and after it got it going, I took the sample out and left it there because I was curious as to how. You ever heard like doing a forced ferment test, where you sort of intentionally take a sample and warm it up to see how far it will ferment? So this is just kind of doing that, really. I'm not tasting it or anything as it goes. I'm just seeing where it finishes, and if it's closer to the ferment temperature, then obviously it's a fairly good indicator of where the gravity is. I know someone else that would do the same thing, but he'd actually just put the sample jar with a hydrometer in it back in his brew fridge. So he could then just open up his brew fridge and go, okay, it's at that gravity now. Because assuming it's kind of should be virtually the same as what's in the actual closed up fermenter. And that saved him having to keep opening up the fermenter to see what progress was.
That's a pretty good idea. Thanks for that.
I actually batch barge, so I take sort of readings of first runnings, second runnings, and do a quick calculation just to give me a guide on where I'm sort of heading. So that gives you a heads up whether or not you might want to add some DMA into it to get your gravity up and things like that. So, again, analog based, I write that all down on my Beersmith printout that is on your clipboard in the brewery during the brew day. So, yeah, and I've got all the recipes are in your clear pockets in lever arch files, going back to my first brews are going back to the 80s with all the handwritten ones, just like Les does.
Actually, I take lots of notes and lots of readings throughout the whole process, except in the fermenter. It's the one area where I haven't yet. dived into this kind of, I don't know, ice spindle or whatever, tracking. I just give it plenty. I control the temperature and I give it plenty of time. Every brew gets at least 2 weeks because I want to make sure the yeast has done all of its cleaning up as well before I interfere with it. And then to cold crash, remove the bubble trap. I'm in plastic buckets as well. Remove the bubble trap, put a foil balloon filled with CO2 so you don't get any drawback of the sterilizing fluid back into the beer. And that works for me so far. And I guess because it's worked, I've kind of been disincentivized from investing in these kind of gravity and temperature trackers. But that's the one area that's kind of a blind spot for me at the moment, because I've not had any
Solutions looking for a problem.
Sorry?
Solutions looking for a problem, I guess.
Well, I guess if you want to know what's happening, you need to have a tool for that. It's probably not a good idea to keep looking in and keep dipping a hydrometer in. So these devices have a place, but I just haven't quite found enough of a reason to do it yet for myself.
That's the case for those guys that don't use plastic buckets and you're on conicals. You've got your little drawer off, but if you've only got small volumes, every time you take a couple 100 mil off to put in your hydrometer, you think, oh my God, by the end of the brew day, I've lost nearly a litre of beer, for God's sake. So, I mean,
yeah,
I know
that's
some guys ferment even smaller volumes. So like Serge in your kitchen there, I mean, you're on a lot smaller volumes, aren't you?
Well, I brew very small volumes because I can't drink them quickly enough. And most of my mates over the past 3 to 4 or 5 years have cut down on alcohol. So like I brew half the size of what I used to 3 years ago, for example. But I actually use 3 tools for measurements. I use a refractometer throughout the brew day just to give me an idea of where I'm at, through the different steps. The first reading is always a hydrometer reading. If I use an ice spindle, which for the non-funky brews, shall we say, then that goes in. But recently, I've had a real trouble with battery drain, even with like an hour's refresh time. I used to easily get a couple of brews out on a single battery, but swapped out for a new one, exactly the same. So I'm not sure what's going on there. And then, the final measurement is also always a hydrometer. And if I fancy sampling, then I'll also take a hydrometer measurement throughout the brew day. But with a conical, and I don't use airlocks. I start the fermentation under a balloon, and the balloon has a one-way air valve on it. So when I know the fermentation is done, is when the balloon, which is like huge, starts deflating slightly, I close the one-way valve, and then that's it. So I haven't used an airlock in quite a few years now.
Yeah, I ferment sort of 16-litre batches exclusively, really, in a 19-litre corny keg. So obviously I can't see in it, and it's tricky to draw samples out. So I use an ice spindle, and I track it through an app called Brew Spy, which I find quite good. And then that Brew Spy also integrates with Plato Keg as well. So I've got Plato Keg. So yeah, so that's sort of my reason for using the float-in hydrometer. But I don't particularly put too much store in what it actually says. I'm more looking for the actual fact that it's finished fermenting. So it's more of an indication, and then I'll do separate readings then when I pull the when I put it into a serving keg. I'll then take a reading then and get my figures, my actual figures from that.
Yeah, that's why I find ice spindle very useful. Frankly, I don't really care for getting precise calibration. It just gives me an idea of how the fermentation is progressing, and I know when it's finished because it's stable, and I almost don't care what the value is. But also, because it's roughly, within several points, even if it's within 10 points on a high gravity brew, and I find that those are mostly the ones out of whack. We're talking about like over 1100 starting gravity. It allows you to control your temperature regime a little bit better, because when you're 75 done with your fermentation, 50% done with your fermentation, etc., around ester production, so you start low and you ramp up.
Yeah, I also like it for the fact that it gives you the temperature reading, because of course I've got a probe in the fermentation fridge, but that's on the outside of the keg, so at least the ice spindle gives you the temperature of what the beer actually is. Not normally they're within a degree of each other anyway, but at least you've got that reassurance.
Yeah, that's true. My conical is jacketed with the heater, so and I find what I read at the top with an ice spindle, and at the bottom with the built-in thermometers within half a degree, which is perfectly good enough.
Yeah, that corresponds with my experience, half a degree. I think the temperature in the ice spindle, the version that I've got, the LEDs are on all the time. There's a little bit of heat inside the tube, and the probe is blue tack to the outside of the plastic fermenter. But half a degree, I think, is good. It's good to pick your transition times, because I like spunding. So Brew Pilot I've set mine up to measure pressure, so I can see the pressure, and it's interesting. You can tell when this is all through the numbers, of course. You can tell when fermentation's kicked off before there's any visible signs, because you just get a 0.3 increase in PSI, and it's just starting to kick off. There's little things that you notice. Anyway.
How easy are the sort of ice spindles to keep clean and sanitize?
Really easy. I mean, I must have used them in 200 brews probably. Never had a problem with. People used to go on about having to be really careful not to scratch the outside. I mean, I am careful with it. I found a source for the lids, so they can just be thrown away, and another one, I can't remember which orange juice container it is, that has exactly the same lid, same weight. So they're really easy to clean. I mean, as I say, I've never had a problem, and as I say, I've used them hundreds of times now. Going back to the Brew Pilot has a nice feature on it as well, with the ability to be able to change according to circumstance. So when you get to a certain point in the fermentation, you can set the Brew Pilot to say at a particular gravity, start ramping the temperature up, and it has quite nice control over the temperature schedule and so on it.
Yeah, I just give mine a hose off gently. I have my special toothbrush that is used to clean the grooves, PBW to begin with, and charge it up, and then give it a good star sand before it goes back in the brew. So I guess there's a probability that there's some carryover of yeast from one batch to the next, but it would be minimal, because the volume of yeast that I tend to repitch or pitch will far outweigh any possible wild yeast contaminants, I think. But it's not affected the brew at the moment that I can detect.
the wrapped system that Kegland are doing now looks quite interesting, because they use their own floating hydrometer, and now they've got a temperature controller. I think the two sort of talk to each other, so you can program it so that when the floating hydrometer realizes it's gone to a certain gravity, it'll then change the temperature on the temperature controller, which all sounds very very interesting. But of course, you've all got to swap over all your equipment then, which isn't going to happen. But yeah, if you were starting off fresh, it was certainly something worth looking at.
That is basically one of the features of Brew Pilot, the open source software that I've been using. It has that ability to do that. I think Kegland are very good at seeing what people come up with as either a problem or a workaround something, and then sort of take it themselves. I'm not sure on the system that they use, though. I think I don't know whether you have to buy into their app or something with the wraps or something.
Yeah, they use some sort of web-based system, I think.
Yeah, which put me off it slightly, because I prefer the open source stuff that was, Brew Pilot does all of that.
I think you're on mute, James.
Yeah. So Arthur, what do you do for your readings, your record keeping?
I just got a tilt, and and obviously that logs into Brewfather, and then I just I just love looking at the charts, and I think probably it's those charts that have really sort of allowed me to understand the fermentation and the process that obviously the fermentation goes through. So I've really obviously learned a lot just from those charts over the past year.
Fantastic. Right. Well, I guess I'm sort of roughly at the end of the stuff I was gonna go through with you guys. Apart from the odd thing, bits and bobs. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add about brewing software, or yeah, any questions or anything like that.
Could you post a link to yours? Be interesting to look.
I'll just do that.
See how it
Yeah,
compares.
brewbats.com. Yeah, it's so yeah, it was so about 15 months or so. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible. It's kind of hard, because I kind of started with a Beersmith XML exports, which has a lot of data in it, as some of you may be aware. And there's two different types as well. So and they're all the fields are slightly different. So kind of started off with this really complex piece of data, and tried to sort of work backwards from there. So yeah, there's a lot going on. I've tried to simplify it as much as I could, but there's only so much you can do, to sort of get as much data and information as possible, which I think unfortunately, well, most people here won't have had much of an issue, but I think for beginner brewers it can be quite intimidating and quite off-putting to see all this all this terminology when they're just trying to get their head around brewing itself. So yeah, that's what I tried to do.
I kind of think that, but then I'm a relatively new to brewing. I used to brew when I was younger, when I was a student, but I've had 30 years off, and I came back to it in lockdown. I think as you've got a responsibility to go and read up on it. You shouldn't just be opening things and then firing off loads of stupid questions to a Facebook group. I get annoyed at that. Read a book, learn about it a little bit, and then it makes sense. That's my take on it anyway.
Just having Google it. Yeah, so the current the website, it's really just a demo. I was thinking at some point and sort of trying to trying to launch a direct competitor to Brewfather, but I think Brewfather's got about a 7-year head start on me, and I just kind of ran out of energy. So I got it to the point where it's usable. There's loads and loads of charts, so it's quite visual. I've posted a couple of videos. There's some calculators as well. If you basically sign up, you'll get like 10 free recipes. It's pretty much the same as Brewfather, but there's no subscription at the moment. So yeah, all of my recipes from 8 years or so of brewing are up on there as well. So you'll see them. They're all public recipes. So you can have a little play around with them. You can duplicate them, and yeah, be very interested if anybody has any feedback whatsoever, be it good or bad. Yeah, sort of always interesting. I'm probably not going to be working on this for quite a long time, I don't think, but who knows? I might get some energy to come back to it and make things even more shiny and swanky. So yeah, there we go. Okay. What sort of time do you normally sort of sign off at these, James? As it's
well, we just kind of sign off when it's all done. But I think we've obviously spent quite a bit of time talking about everything here. So I mean, I would say thank you for coming along and leading the discussion and presenting everything you presented as well. So everybody,
James.